Today I'm going to break down the pivotal debate between Malcolm X and Bayard Rustin. I'll be honest and let you know right off the bat, I am 100% on the side of Malcolm X. So I do have a clear bias. However, I will still let you know the facts of each side of the debate so you can see what side you fall on. I also want to point out that this debate ultimately hurt the black community in the end because instead of uniting, we were split, and this split still lives on today. And this debate is the prime example of how we must learn from the past. The classic debate between Malcolm X and Bayard Rustin took place in November of 1960 in New York. It became a pivotal moment in the ideological battle between two key figures in the Black American civil rights movement, each representing different approaches to achieving racial justice and equality in America. First up, we have Malcolm X. A prominent figure in the Nation of Islam at the time, Malcolm X advocated for black nationalism, self-defense, and racial separation. He believed that black Americans should be empowered to live independently of white America, and that they should use any means necessary to achieve their rights and defend themselves. His rhetoric was often seen as militant and focused on the idea that black people needed to control their own economic and political power and should not rely on white society for justice. I agree on that. On the flip side, you had Bayard Rustin. Rustin was a civil rights leader best known for his role as chief organizer of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963. He was a pacifist and a proponent of nonviolent civil disobedience in the tradition of Gandhi. Rustin had close ties to leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who emphasized peaceful protest as a means of social change. He was also a key strategist for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. The debate centered on several key ideological differences between Malcolm X and Bayard Rustin regarding the best path to racial justice went a little like this. First up, violence versus nonviolence. Malcolm X argued that nonviolent resistance was not practical for black Americans, especially in the face of violent oppression and systemic racism. He believed that self-defense was a fundamental right and that black Americans should not hesitate to use violence if necessary to protect themselves from white aggression. Bayard Rustin, in contrast, was a staunch advocate of nonviolence, drawing from the philosophy of Gandhi and his own experiences in the labor and civil rights movement. Rustin argued that nonviolent resistance was not only morally superior, but also the most effective strategy for achieving long-term racial justice. He believed that nonviolence could expose the immorality of the system and win public sympathy for the cause. Then they spoke of integration versus separation. Malcolm X was a strong proponent of separatism. He believed that black Americans would never receive true justice or equality in a society dominated by white people. His vision was for black people to establish their own communities, schools, and institutions independent of white influence. Rustin, however, championed the idea of integration. He believed that the ultimate goal of the civil rights movement should be to integrate into the broader American society as equals. Rustin argued that the struggle was not about separation, but about achieving justice and equality within the existing framework of American democracy. Then they spoke about the role of government. Malcolm X was deeply skeptical of the U.S. government, viewing it as an institution fundamentally hostile to black people. He believed that black people could not rely on the government to deliver justice and that it was necessary to build independent black institutions. Rustin, on the other hand, believed in working within the existing political system to achieve change. He argued that legislative and political reforms, such as those pursued through the civil rights movement, were essential to breaking down systemic racism. He saw the government as a tool that, with the right pressure, could be used to secure equal rights for black people. Malcolm X sharply criticized Rustin's commitment to nonviolence, arguing that it was unrealistic in the context of the brutal oppression black Americans face. He pointed out that white Americans, particularly in the South, had shown time and time time again that they were willing to use violence, extreme violence, against black people with little to no repercussions. For Malcolm X, nonviolence was seen as a form of submission. He also mocked the idea of waiting for white people to change their hearts and believed that real change could only come through self-empowerment, self-defense, and the development of independent black institutions. Rustin countered by emphasizing the moral superiority of nonviolence and how it had proven effective in past struggles, notably the Indian independence movement under Gandhi. Kept bringing up Gandhi. And the American Civil Rights Movement under Martin Luther King. He argued that violence would only perpetuate cycles of hatred and destruction, and that integration, while difficult, was the ultimate goal. Rustin also noted that many of the leaders and activists in the Civil Rights Movement had experienced personal violence and injustice, but still maintained their commitment to nonviolent tactics. He argued that maintaining nonviolence was not only a moral stance, but also a practical one, as it allowed for broader coalitions and support from white allies. Oh boy, that phrase, dangerous. After this debate, Malcolm X's rhetoric was often seen as confrontational, challenging Rustin's ideas with a sense of urgency. His delivery was filled with passion and intensity, often evoking the notion of the struggle for black liberation as a matter of survival. He frequently used vivid imagery and historical references to emphasize his factual points. Rustin focused on what he believed was the safer approach. His approach was methodical, seeking an appeal to reason and a long-term vision of the racial integrated and just society. This debate did not necessarily result in a clear victor, but it highlighted the philosophical rift between the civil rights movement leaders. While Malcolm X's ideas would later evolve, especially after his split from the Nation of Islam and his pilgrimage to Mecca, his commitment to black self-determination, self-defense, and his growing openness to internationalism remained central to his message. Meanwhile, Bayard Rustin continued to advocate for integration and nonviolent civil disobedience, playing a key role in the March on Washington, and continued his work within the more traditional civil rights organizations like the SCLC. The significance of the debate remains a seminal moment in the history of the black civil rights movement, illustrating the tension between two dominant currents in the movement. I would also like to point out that just a few days before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, he was talking about mistakes that were made during the civil rights movement. And that mistake, he concluded, was integration, which to me proves that Malcolm X's stance was always the right one. Building our own institutions and not waiting for some magical day when white people no longer hate black people. Now I'm off to go live my pro-black life. But before I go, I just want to say, I love you, black man. I love you, black woman. Knowledge is power. Power to the people.